I am Ramakrishna Perugu from India. I give my gratitude to Mr. Christoph F. Sabani, who has given me this opportunity to address the Albanian poets, scholars, intellectuals on the event of International Poets Association Festival. I congratulate all the poets attending the conference till 29th September. Today, as requested by the Christoph, I am presenting the paper on Indian modern literary trends and Albanian trends. This is based on the references and collection from the various sources. First, Indian modern literary trends. In almost all the Indian languages, the modern age begins with the first struggle for India's freedom in 1857 or near that time. The impact of Western civilization, the rise of political consciousness, and the change of society could be seen in what was written during that time. Contact with the Western world resulted in India's acceptance of Western thought on the one hand and rejection of it on the other, and resulted in an effort made to revive her ancient glory and Indian consciousness. A large number of writers opted for a synthesis between Indianization and Westernization in their search of national ideology. All these attitudes were combined to bring about the Renaissance in 19th century India. But it was a Renaissance in a country which was under foreign domination. So it was not that kind of Renaissance which had spread in 14th, 15th century Europe, where scientific reasoning, individual shape in the context of the Indian race, movement and milieu, and as a result, nationalistic, reformistic and revivalistic thinking found its way to literature, which slowly turned itself into a pan-Indian movement, spearheaded in different parts of the country by Renaissance leaders like Rajaram Mohan Rai, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Swami Vivekananda, Madhav Govind Ranade, U.V. Swaminath Iyer, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, K.V. Pantulu, Narmada Shankar, Lal Shankar Dave and others. The leaders of the Renaissance, in fact, succeeded in instilling nationalistic fervor in people and induced in them a desire for social reform and a sentimental yearning for their past glory. The emergence of nationalism. It is true that the idea of modern state took root in Indian society because of India's contact with Western ideas. But very soon, Indian writers like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and others made use of this newly acquired concept of nationalism to attack colonial rule, and in the process created their own brand of nationalism rooted in the soil. Bankim Chandra wrote many historical novels like Durgesh Nandini and Anandamath, acquired a pan-Indian popularity and made nationalism and patriotism a part of Dharma. The literature of nationalism, reformism and revivalism. Patriotic songs proliferated almost spontaneously in different languages as the resistance of a community against foreign rule. Rangalal in Bengal, Mirza Ghalib in Urdu and Bharatendu Harishchandra in Hindi expressed themselves as the patriotic voice of the era. This voice was on the one hand against colonial rule and on the other for the glorification of India. Besides, Mirza Ghalib wrote ghazals in Urdu about love with unusual imagery and metaphors. He accepted life both as joyous existence and as dark and painful experience. The same period, the birth of novel is also associated with the social reform-oriented movement of the 19th century. Historical novels were written by several writers including Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Harinarayan Apte and others in the different regional languages of the Indian part. Indian Romanticism. The trend of Indian Romanticism, ushered in by three great facts, influenced the destiny of modern Indian literatures. These forces were Sri Aurobindo's search for the divine in man, Tagore's quest for the beautiful in nature and man, and Mahatma Gandhi's experiments with truth and non-violence. Sri Aurobindo, through his poetry and philosophical treatise, The Life Divine, presents the prospect of the ultimate revelation of divinity in everything. He wrote mostly in English. Tagore's quest for beauty was the spiritual quest which attained fruition in the final realization that service to the humanity was the best form of contact with God. Then progressive literature. The advent of Marxism on the Indian literary scene in the 30s is a phenomenon which India shared with many other countries. Both Gandhi and Marx were driven by opposition to imperialism and concern for the dispossessed sections of the society. The Progressive Writers Association was originally established in 1936 by some expatriate writers in London, like Mulkraj Anand. However, it soon became a great pan-Indian movement that brought together the Gandhian and Marxist insights into the society. The movement was especially conspicuous in Urdu, Punjabi, Bengali, Telugu and Malayalam, but its impact was felt all over India. Then the contemporary literature. In the Uttara Adhunika, that is the post-modern era, the effort is to be natural, to be Indian, to be near to the common man, to be socially conscious. The third generation of Malayalam writers like N. Prabhakaran and P. Surendran prefer the term anti-modernism to postmodernism and are content simply to narrate human tales without any explicit social message or philosophical pretensions. Vijayan Datta and Surendra Prakash Urdu are now writing stories without any ideological prejudices. The modernist idea that anything simple should not be accepted now questioned. It is established now that the simple text may present complex extra-textual structures. Even cultural references simply stated in poetry can have different semantic values. These regional novelists have forcibly demolished the myths created by the Western Indologists that Indianness is just fatalism, or that Indianness is to be identified with harmony and order, and Indian vision cannot be perceived its own reality. The central tension experienced by the vast majority of contemporary Indian writers in that of transition from the rural and traditional to an urban post-modern situation, expressed either through a romantic nostalgia for the village left behind or through fear and hatred of cruel impersonal city with all its sex, horror, murder and cruelty. Several Indian writers from the different regional languages presented their novels in this aspect. Several other trends also recently evolved as feminist literature, Muslim minority literature, and regionalism is also playing a big role in contemporary literature. This is all about the Indian modern literary trends. Now we look into the Albanian literature. Albanian literature is a European literature, and yet it has evolved in relative isolation from the mainstream of European culture. The Albanian people, who stem from the indigenous nomadic tribes of the southwestern Balkans and who are at home in some of the roughest mountain terrain of the whole peninsula, consolidated their settlements far from the major crossroads of European civilization. Theirs continues to be a different and quite unique European culture, and their written literature still reflects many of its particular characteristics. This is indeed one of the factors that make Albanian literature so fascinating. Unfortunately, very little has been written about the Albanian letters, with the exception, of course, of works published in Albanian itself. At the international level, the subject is still largely neglected. This neglect derives primarily from the lack of international specialists with a solid knowledge of literary Albanian and is not due to any lack of creative literature itself. Albanian literature was late to evolve, and its development, indeed its very existence, was threatened in many periods. The first book published in Albanian that we know of was written in 1555. Despite this and other early works, one can only really speak of a national literature in Albania from the late 19th century onwards. The tender plant of Albanian literature grew in a rocky soil. Time and again it sprouted and blossomed, and time and again it was torn out of the earth by the brutal course of political history in the Balkans. The early literature of Christian Albania disappeared under the banners of Islam when the country was forcefully incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. The still little known literature of Muslim Albania withered in the late 19th century when the Albanians turned their backs on the sublime Porte and strove to become an independent European nation. The solid beginnings of modern literature in the 1930s were weeded out ruthlessly by the Stalinist rulers who took power in 1944 and held on until 1990. Finally, the literature of Albanian socialist realism, which the communist regime has created, became outdated, untenable, unwanted the moment that dictatorship collapsed. Over long periods of their history, the Albanians were even forbidden by law to write and publish in their own language. A ban on Albanian language, books and schooling was enforced throughout Albania virtually until the end of Ottoman rule in 1912. And a similar ban was maintained in Kosovo under Serb rule, officially or unofficially, up to 1960s. Nonetheless, this tender plant has produced some stunning blossoms in that rocky and legendary soil, many of which merit the attention of the outside world. Albanian literature, a short story, hopes to contribute to an awakening of interest in the field, but it can only be a first step. For further research, the English-speaking reader may consult earlier two-volume History of Albanian Literature, New York, 1995, which with its 1054 pages also include much detailed information on a myriad of minor authors and works up to 1990. Dictionary of Albanian Literature, published by Westport 1986. Other valuable resources in English include Archie Pipa's Albanian Literature, Social Perspectives, Munich 1978, and his contemporary Albanian literature, and Stuart Mann's Albanian Literature, an outline of prose, poetry and drama, published in London. The latter specifically was the pre-WW2 period, World War II period. Koko Biku's monographs, History of Albanian Literature, published in Tirana 1980, which was widely distributed abroad during the communist era. This should be understood as work of Stalinist propaganda. That is the party's official view of what Albanian literature was supposed to consist of and the values it was supposed to reflect. The both Indian and Albanian literatures equally presenting the human emotions, social revolutions, social movements, contemporarily, historically, and doing its valuable service to sustain the literature in both areas. Thank you very much.